In a season filled with the uncanny, you have to expect the unexpected. For Shanghai Dragons fans, though, that seemed to end with a playoff appearance. After their 0-40 record in the inaugural season, even a match win was greeted with excitement. But for the Shanghai Dragons players, that was only the beginning.
Even still, it would be a disservice to the players of the Dragons to reduce their historic win in the Stage 3 playoffs to the story of a winless team taking the grand victory. It was so much more than that for the 6 core members of this roster. For that, we have to turn to history and to Koma, Luffy, Youngjin, and Ding, formerly of the Kongdu Panthera, who formed the backbone of the Dragons. Setting the stage begins with what many consider to be the most competitive Overwatch tournament outside the Overwatch League, Contenders Korea 2018.
In Seasons 1 and 2 of 2018, Kongdu Panthera would meet the talented team of Runaway and lose to them repeatedly. If you've been watching Overwatch League this season, the players of Runaway should be familiar to you, for they now make up the impressive team of the Vancouver Titans.
In Season 2, Kongdu Panthera breezed their way to the finals, where one of the best sets of Overwatch to ever be played was witnessed. In a first to 4 map win set, where 8 total maps were played, eventually, heartbreakingly, Kongdu Panthera was defeated by none other than Runaway yet again. And despite all 6 starting members of Panthera being picked up for Overwatch League as a result of their performance, there was still the fact that Kongdu Panthera had never had a chance to stand crowned as winners.
Of course, there are 2 of the current Shanghai Dragons core that weren't part of Kongdu Panthera. And for the fate of Gamsu, Season 1 of the Overwatch League would be where we turn next. When Gamsu started on the Boston Uprising at the start of Overwatch League's inaugural season, the roster was ridiculed. Many analysts even predicted them to come in last, and throughout the season, the Uprising was filled with conflict and internal strife. Despite that, Gamsu and the rest of Boston would go on to make history with the first undefeated stage in the Overwatch League. But even then, that same stage they lost to the New York Excelsior in the finals and couldn't claim the championship. When Gamsu was abruptly traded to the Shanghai Dragons, many fans were confused and fearful that his career would be shattered, despite the Dragons' almost completely new roster.
Last, but nowhere near least for the Shanghai Dragons' new starting 6, was DM, who, looking back, has spent a lot of his career in the shadow of greatness, whether it was being the afterthought in the Carpe DM duo, with Carpe being a successful and recognized player on the Philadelphia Fusion, or having the dominance of Lucky Future Zenith in the Chinese Overwatch contender scene being written off due to the perceived lack of strength of the region, DM never quite got the respect that his skills deserved.
And finally, of course, we cannot mention the Shanghai Dragons at all without acknowledging their first disastrous year, where they set an infamous professional record of the longest loss streak of all time, in any sport. 6 players who were second best, underdogs or afterthoughts, now on a team that had defined rock bottom in the Overwatch League. Now granted, no one believed these players were undeserving of the league or even close to the 0-40 of the previous roster, but even then, most analysts thought the Dragons to be toward the middle of the pack. 0-40, or the equivalent for this season, which would be 0-28, was out of everyone's minds. But these players wanted more than to be an acceptable improvement. They wanted the greatness that had eluded each and every one of them.
And turning to this season, they did it their own way, Paul, all season long. You know, when most teams were running the 3-3, they were starting to run the Sombra Goats.
And even after that, once other teams picked up the Sombra Goats, then they started to run 3 DPS and look better on it than anybody else who tried to catch up to them.
Yeah, I mean, you know, when we talk about the 3 DPS in the Overwatch League, we immediately jump to Chengdu Hunters, but honestly, the best team in the triple DPS has been Shanghai, with a high consistency play from Ding in the Pharah, obviously DM on the Widow and the Sombra, and Youngjin making a surprise appearance on a multitude of characters from Doomfist to Roadhog. It really has been Shanghai Dragons quietly taking the mantle as the DPS team.
Which is interesting when we look back at it that way, right? Because coming into playoffs, this stage, for Stage 3, they came in at 8th. Even a single more loss, and they wouldn't have made it. They went to 5 maps with Atlanta Reign earlier. If Atlanta had just pulled out a little bit more, this would have been an entirely different playoff bracket.
And I mean, even towards the very end of the stage, we have to acknowledge that against the Guangzhou Charge, Shanghai did not look too convincing. They dropped that series, and only against a weakened and somewhat struggling Philadelphia roster, ironically their Carpe playing on that team, did they actually get into the stage playoffs. So for Shanghai Dragons, they made it into the stage playoffs quite literally by the skin of their teeth.
Yeah, and they lost to Valiant earlier this stage, who were also in the playoffs, doing a similar style to Shanghai. So a lot of people were thinking that Valiant was just the better version of Shanghai at this time, but man, did Shanghai prove them wrong.
And I think this now stems as we get into the playoff picture itself and how Shanghai made it to that #1 spot in Stage 3 and the final stage playoffs that we're going to see in the Burbank Arena, right? We have to look at the teams they played because they had, quite literally, the hardest path to the finals of any team.
Yeah, they beat New York Excelsior, Vancouver Titans, and the San Francisco Shock. Those three teams have been named as teams 1, 2, and 3 the entire season.
And it wasn't particularly close. Against the New York Excelsior, they ran riot over the team, and honestly, were in full control of that series the whole time.
Same with Vancouver. All they did was shut down Twilight over and over and over again. And by the time Vancouver adapted, Shanghai just adapted back and locked out the series in a 4-1.
And there they get revenge for history of the Chengdu Panthera line as they end up finally taking down Runaway. A little bit name changed here, but nonetheless, heading to the finals against what a lot of people argued was the best team in Overwatch.
The best team this year, right? The only team to make all 3 stage finals. The San Francisco Shock, the team that had the golden stage. They didn't drop a map stage in stage 2. They clowned on them for the first half of the series.
And, as they say, history mirrors itself. Shanghai was the first team to take a map off the Shock in that golden stage, right? In those stage playoffs.
Very true.
But yeah, no, for the first 3 maps, it was all Shanghai. They went up 3-0 and looked dominant trying to close out the series.
And even in the next 3 maps where the San Francisco Shock would come back and give Dragons a run for their money, it was still close. It wasn't like this was some sudden switch that the Shock had flipped and, oh, this was the team that was going to win and now we see the true Shock. No, it was Shock fighting tooth and nail on weird compositions that they did not look comfortable on.
And honestly, at this point in time, with the San Francisco Shock going down, the sky is the limit for Shanghai Dragons. Next stage has been a long-rumored 2-2-2 lock, and this could really be the opportunity for Shanghai to staple themselves at the top of the league.
It certainly could be. I mean, we've been talking about Ding and Diem all season long as potentially the best DPS duo in the Overwatch League, right? And if they get to be that duo in a meta where everyone has to try and match them mechanically, good luck, Overwatch League. Good luck.
But it's not over yet, right? There's still stage 4 coming through, and for the Shanghai Dragons, while this is a feather in their cap, this is a mark that they really will take pride in. The season is not over, and they're gunning for that finals position.
Oh, certainly. Right now, they're sitting in 8th overall, and Shanghai haven't guaranteed themselves a spot in the actual postseason playoffs yet. They're currently sitting in 8th. They would make the play-in tournament should it happen today, but they have to do well in stage 4, and then they're going to need a playoff run to give themselves that grand final appearance in Philadelphia. Thanks, guys, for tuning in. It's been Pulsable and LaFon as usual. If you liked the video, there is a button for that down below, and if not, make sure you leave a comment. Let us know what we can do better. Always looking to improve here, but either way, make sure you subscribe to Elohel Esports for more Overwatch content.